one small, tiny, doesn't matter at all detail. I chuckled a bit when on Yumi's planet they talked about just cooking food on the ground. Like when you want to go cook your eggs for the morning, you just go set them on the ground because the ground's hot. And I chuckled because I just did the exact same thing in Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom the other day when I was walking through the mountainous lava area and dropped some eggs on the ground and cooked them, and it worked beautifully. I just thought of that.
Very
Been playing
nice.
a
That
lot of
is
that
really
game
funny.
too much.
I live in Texas. I know people who've baked cookies in the dashboard of their car, so
Have you ever fried an egg on your
anything is
driveway?
possible. Yeah, you could definitely do it. You could definitely do it.
Terrifying.
Anyways,
All right, should we talk about language? The use of some certain language by some certain people. So
Go ahead.
Yumi uses the term Nimi as an honorific and calls what's her face, I don't remember her name, but she calls her Warden Nimi. And this was the thing that stuck out to me immediately last year when we read this. I was like, that is so cool. And Hoyd as the narrator uses some interesting terms for who he's talking to. He uses the term Vaden and Alethi. He uses does he use Scadrial by name?
Yes.
He uses Roshar by name. And he uses Chul's. He there's several terms that he uses. And Elliot, you were talking about this a little earlier about like photons and electricity. He name drops those things as if his audience would recognize them. So there's a couple different, but the nuance here is Yumi is using the word Nimi, not Hoyd. And I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on that before I bring up what Sanderson talked about in his live stream about it. So, what are you guys' thoughts on this?
so I have to say this stuck out to me as well. Like I noticed it almost right away, and so naturally, I have to just naturally connect the dots between Yumi and at least some capacity on Roshar. We see Nimi used most by Zeth, right? Who is, oh gosh,
Shin.
Shin from Shinovar. I almost said Kolinar, but nope. From Shinovar. And so, like, we haven't seen much of Shinovar, but looking at like some general similarities between the two groups of people, like not too far fetched. They're both very like, I guess, religious, centered around, I don't know, ritual, respect, all these different things. And so I just couldn't help but compare that, like, are these the same group of people? Is this related? Do they know each other? Like, where did Nimi, the expression of Nimi, come from? Because obviously there's some kind of similar connection there. Just a whole bucket of questions, but no answers right now.
I'm torn on this. And when we talked about this a year ago, we actually spun a couple of theories about this. But now that I've read it again and had time to think about it, I, I don't know. The time, where are we on the timeline? That's what's throwing me.
Yeah.
Is if this was before Stormlight, I could spin some theories about world hoppers in the future feeding this down to the Shin and Zeth. But I suppose it could work the other way as well, I guess, is the Shin could over the years be the culture that feeds into this culture. So we could be like many thousands of years in the future or something like that, perhaps. I don't know. I'm almost kind of hesitant now at this point to try and make any direct ties.
So here is what Brandon Sanderson said on his live stream. He very much made the distinction between Hoyd's voice and Yumi's voice. That Hoyd is using terms that his audience is familiar with, and that also applies to Nimi. So he is interpreting what Yumi said for his audience and using the term Nimi is what he said. And then he said, but there's something more there. Specifically with the word Nimi, he put that in there intentionally for us to draw connections between Shin and Yumi's planet. He said that one specifically, there's a little bit more there. But as far as the rest of the terms, that Hoyd is simply using terms that his audience, whoever he's talking to, is familiar with.
Right.
He also said, and this is rather frustrating to me, and I hope we get this resolved at some point. He said that there is no epilogue to or synopsis, short story, whatever, where we get to find out who Hoyd is telling the story to. We never get to know. And he specifically says, don't waste your time trying to figure it out because you won't be able to. And I was like, why would you set up a story like this and specifically use terms that we're on the lookout for and then tell us? I mean, obviously he's trying to save us time and sit and tell us don't look for this. It's not in the epilogue. But I really wish it was. I really wish we could find out who Hoyt is sitting here talking to.
What what if what if the audience, the receiver of the story, is meant to be like as far in the future in the Cosmere as possible? Like he just wants an excuse to use all the references he can. So it's kind of a assume generic knows everything person audience after all these events has happened, just so that he can reference every single other thing in it in the time of the narration of this, not necessarily the story that we're seeing.
Right.
Maybe that would be fun if we could learn who he's talking to. Zeth, maybe.
But my guess is Sigzil, actually. That would be my guess. But if I had to put, but I have no idea.
World Hopper Zeth after he defeats Odium and saves all of Roshar. That's who the audience is.
Maybe he's talking to Waldo, our world hopping Contra.
Ooh.
I'm the world hopping Zeth idea is my dream come true, but we don't know about that. Not yet.
All right. Do you guys want to talk about the chapter 7 specifically, or do we have more to talk about here?
Don't think so. I'm trying to scan through the notes because we kind of jumped all around,
Mm-hmm.
making sure we didn't miss anything.
There's several
I did
more
have one
stuff.
thing in the notes about,
Go ahead.
yeah, maybe just real quickly before we jump into the final kind of section of this. I wrote in the notes perpendicularity with a question mark.
Okay.
Like, could Painter's Planet have something going on with a perpendicularity there, where the nightmares are trying to cross over from cognitive realm into physical realm? I couldn't quite put enough pieces together to come up with a theory there, but I wondered if you guys could. Maybe not.
Interesting.
Maybe we need more.
I didn't even consider where perpendicularity might be.
That is a really good point. Do we have any idea what? There's no mention of a shard necessarily on Yumi's planet, is there? You see
No.
virtuosity on Painter's planet, and I don't know how connected they are.
Right.
Could there be investiture from virtuosity on both planets, or probably just on Painter's planet would be my assumption. But
Yeah, I don't know. I think we might need some more information for that one, but I'm penciling that down as keep an eye out for where or what might be going on here as far as travel into and out of the cognitive realm, if that's even happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Your approach is very different to mine, Elliot. The questions you're asking are very different than mine. It's very interesting.
Gotta
So
figure out
something
what's going on here.
something else that I wanted to highlight real quick was some of the lore and the myth behind and the folk tales that Painter tells the audience um, on how the nightmares came about and stuff like that. And Hoyd tells whoever he's speaking to that we're close to where Virtuosity splintered herself, so maybe this has something to do with it. But some of the quotes that Painter tells about, like, have been passed down about when the nightmares came, it was 17 centuries ago, so 1,700 years, and there's a primary source that says, I watched it rain the blood of a dying god, which I think is very interesting use of words. And then there's two other ones. Elliot, do you have it in front of you? Do you know the other two quotes that he comes up with? Should be right
No,
after
it was
that.
in a second.
I can probably find it. I just found it. So the first quote is, I watched it rain the blood of a dying god, one account read. I crawled through tar that took the faces of the people I had loved. It took them, and their blood became black ink. The next one says, Grandfather spoke of the nightmares. Another woman had written years later. He doesn't know why he was spared. He stares at nothing when he speaks of those days spent crawling in the darkness, that terror from the sky, until he found another voice. They met and huddled, weeping together, clinging to one another. Though they had never met before that day, they were suddenly brothers, because they were real. And then this one, which I, Painter, find the most unnerving. It will take me. It creeps under the barrier. It knows I am here. That one was found painted on the wall of a cave roughly 100 years later. No bones were ever located. I had the feeling I was reading death rattles. It feels
Yeah,
like
that's exactly what I was thinking. It's so cryptic. I've actually been kind of wrestling with how much can I dig into this given the amount of information provided at this
right.
state. Because we've had, what, 3 Yumi chapters, 4 Painter chapters?
Yeah. A phrase that I wanted to highlight again that I didn't really catch before was, I crawled through tar that took the faces of the people I had loved. What does that sound like to you guys?
Fresh off of Mistborn, it sounds like a mist wraith
Oh,
or a Chandra, like literally taking the faces of people that that you love.
I
Where
was
I've
I was gonna go
what
with Ray Shafir.
that's what I was thinking, Trevor. There's lots of things. There's lots of descriptions, sorry, that remind me of
Mhm.
Ray Shafir. Ray Shafir? Is it with an F or a P? A
PH.
P. Okay. Okay, so between the two.
Yes, both.
Ray Shafir, yes. Um, there's lots of descriptions that sound like Ray Shafir throughout a lot of this. There's descriptions of, what is it? Smoke and shadow are a lot of the words used. And it just feels very reminiscent of that. And so I can't shake that with almost all the descriptions on Painter's Planet, but I don't know how to actually connect those dots.
Do you guys want to hear some of the questions surrounding these with the Q&A?
Definitely.
Okay, so there's some good ones. Let me so one of the questions was, the nightmares are described as deep black that evaporates to smoke. I can think of a certain black sword that has similar characteristics. Is that a coincidence? And Brandon Sanderson's reply was, with a smirk, that is not a coincidence. And another one that I didn't write, but I try to paraphrase for you. They the question was, are nightmares directly related to Midnight Essence? And Brandon Sanderson said essentially yes, that there's things that are happening that are very specific to the rules of Midnight Essence and how they operate.
So we've theorized many times about that black sword, right? And one of the theories I've clung to is a concept of like negative investiture
Mm-hmm.
of some sort. If if you want to go down that line and then try and draw some parallels to this world, could our nightmares be, yeah, some kind of embodiment of that dark investiture or inverse investiture or
Oh,
something like that? And I'm even thinking about our like metabolism line of thought too. Like lift metabolizes food, a positive thing, into a positive force investiture or stormlight-ish. What if nightmares are like a negative version of that, and these nightmares can metabolize fear as a negative force that feeds inverse investiture, something along those lines?
it just made me circle back to what Brandon Sanderson said, that he was confident that Painter was, or he was telling us that Painter was not using investiture. What if he's so
Oh,
confident in that because there's no investiture present on the planet?
yeah,
So then that begs the
yeah,
question, what are the heon lines and why do they push back
yeah.
the shroud? What is happening there?
That is my big question. I've wondered about those for a while because I'm like, if it is Investiture, it seems neat in style, but kind of lame. Like unless I'm sure there's more use to them than if it was Investiture. I'm sure there's more use to them than we've seen in the first couple chapters of this. But that's actually a really curious point. I don't. I could kind of see it there being no investiture whatsoever. But we know that there was a shard, so doesn't there have to be investiture, or is that not necessarily true?
I don't know.
Somewhat related to this, I'm really curious to understand more about the heon lines and how much power the humans have over said heon lines, because the, there's a brief descriptor of they're above the city. There's no telephone poles or wires or anything holding them up. They're just there. And then as you get to the outskirts of the city, they get like right in the middle of the city. They say they're the width of an arm. Like they're 2 inches in diameter. It's a cable. And then as you get closer to the outside, they get smaller. Um, and I'm wondering, is that because they changed the heon lines to be so, or is that just how far they went because that's how far the heon lines went?
I'm very curious about the heon as well. And what's the source
Right.
of these heon lines? It seems logical that if they start thick and strong and they kind of wane as they go outwards and they get less and less powerful. Well, that seems to imply to me that there's kind of a source of this somewhere. And the further away you get from the source, you're losing power. What's the source? I have another question related kind of to the Heon and Stormlight that's going to, in a roundabout way, bring us into Hoyd and Design in their little restaurant that they have.
Okay.
One question I have about Investiture specifically in the restaurant. What was the name of this restaurant? The Noodle Pupil.
The noodle people.
It's like a tongue twister right there. Hoyd shares that he is light weaving a figure, a form for Design, the this figure of a woman, so that she can run this restaurant. What is he powering that light weaving on? Where is he getting the investiture for that? Does he have a crap ton of investiture that he just has with him? It almost seems to imply to me, maybe even confirm, that there has to be investiture here somehow. that he's tapping into? Is it the heon lines? Can he just tap directly into those and fuel his light weaving that way?
So to answer your question, Elliot, if he's not tapping directly into the heon lines, which I would assume is investiture. I don't know how the mechanics of fighting against the shroud, whatever that's happening. If he's not tapping straight into the heon, the most the two most portable forms of investiture that we know of right now are Stormlight, which is the whole side quest of the Ghostbloods trying to get Stormlight off of Roshar. And has that happened at this point? And is that how he's powering said Lightwing? Or Breaths is the going to be the next most portable form of investiture to me. Then the second question is, can you power light weaving with breaths?
Right.
That would be my guess as to what's happening if he is not pulling investiture, if he's not plugged into the outlet, right?
Which may just be the simplest explanation there is he can tap into the electricity essentially running through the entire city and just do that. But apparently he can do that while being a coat rack, which apparently is what he is.
Yes. He claims that he's frozen in time. And there's an interesting line that we had to talk about before we even went live tonight. That as Hoyd is talking to his audience, he has this phrase that he says, "And now that Painter was here, I could open my eyes, or I could see, or something like that." And I put that in the outline, and Elliot, as he was filling out the outline, read that and was like, "What? That was not in the written." So, Elliot, do you have what it says in the write up?
Yeah, we had to do a little bit of investigation here because I just tried to search for what you typed in there and it wasn't coming up anywhere in the writing on the website. But here's what the text on his website says. With Painter there, I could see what was happening. So I'll admit to some pride regarding the way Painter's eyes follow design. When you played, you had to pull back up the audio because that sentence is like completely restructured grammatically when Brandon reads it on YouTube. But it's kind of all the same words almost.
Right,
But when I read the text version, I didn't think anything of that. But the words in the order that they're in the way he reads them, seems to potentially imply something more.
right.
I think is what you might be getting at.
Uh, so when I listened to that, and I did not pick this up at all last year when we covered this, but when Painter walks in the room, Brandon Sanderson says, "Quote, now that Painter was here, I was able to see what was happening." And that's Hoy talking. And I I'm so confused. Why and what are the mechanics of that, and what does Painter have to do with it? Because there seems to be, a magic implication there of Painter needing to be present for Hoyd to be able to see what's going on around him. So that's very strange.
It definitely does. There could be some weird things going on here. Why is Painter different? Why is he different than any of the other painters that are all there in the same restaurant? I guess even with the wording that is in the Brandon reading, I'm not sure that I place as much significance on it. That what they're talking about here, what Hoyt is talking about, is the pride that he feels in the beauty and attractiveness that he's given to design. He's proud of the fact that Painter can't take his eyes off design because design is so beautiful. I kind of just read this as because Painter is obvious in his staring at design, Hoyt notices this.
Okay.
I'm not sure I read anything too big into this, but it is very specifically called out. And there's lots of other young folks in this place that I'm sure Painter's not the only one, glancing at the attractive barmaid sort of thing. I don't know.
Which way do
maybe.
you lean, Paul? Is this a hidden one-liner? Or am I overthinking this?
I mean, personally, I think it's overthought a bit
Okay.
for this line, but I don't know. The thing is, I feel like every time I think that, it is not. Like I feel like I am very wrong. Our shout out today was for sometimes right,
Mm-hmm.
right? And sometimes I think I'm right, but on these predictions, I feel like what I dig out is like, ooh, I think this is gonna be something that's gonna come up and be really big down the line. It's usually not, and I think vice versa. So maybe that's encouraging for your case that I disagree with you.
I don't know. Well, we'll see. When the published version comes out next week, this will be the first thing I go and look at. So I will update you. Um, there's a couple more things in the Q&A that I want to highlight real quick. Hoyd refers to himself as a renowned interdimensional storyteller in capital letters. And Brandon Sanderson was asked uh on the Q&A, does that just mean cognitive, spiritual, physical, or does that imply something more? And Brandon Sanderson was very quick to say, nope, that's exactly what it means. Cognitive, physical, spiritual. He is not implying time travel or a multiverse or something like that. Those are the two golden rules for Sanderson in the Cosmere is there's no multiverse and there's no time travel to the past was his clarification. And I assume he's just holding that clarification meaning if you travel really fast you can time travel to the future where that's feasibly possible as far as we know. But anyway, I just wanted to highlight that.
There's also other kind of like time travel concepts you could think of that are feasible. Like if you could cryogenically store your body and mind and kind of freeze yourself and then wake up 100 years later. From your perspective, you time traveled 100
Right.
years into the future. He could be allowing for that kind of stuff. I, I actually really like the fact that he's explicitly telling us that those are not part of his universe
Right.
because time travel is very cool if it's done well, if it is, a core part of this story or the world that you're in. Unfortunately, what it often gets used as is a cop out. You
Right.
get this like story that's all crafted, and then all of a sudden, the end, it's like, actually, but we just time traveled the whole time, and we were manipulating things as it was going, and it's all fine. Haha. Like that is a terrible use of time travel. Harry Potter, I might be looking at you. And I like the fact that that is not part of this world because Brandon can work in complexity in his world without having to go there. You open a hugely complex can of worms if you bring in time travel. And the fact that we have a world that is so dense and detailed without time travel, impressive.
Well, and I think it's also just straight up necessary for the way Brandon Sanderson approaches this because in the way he approaches the Cosmere is there is a good answer for everything you're asking.
Right.
And if 20 books down the road I introduce the time turner, then your questions become, well, then why didn't Hoy just use the time turner to go back to the way of kings, blah blah, it's
Yep.
very, I think it's very good of Sanderson to say this is off the table. You don't need to theorize about this. Okay, I'm going to quick fires the last of these Q&A stuff, and then we can talk about the climax in chapter 7 to close us out here. So just everything else that was on the Q&A, I'm gonna go through these pretty quickly and you guys can chime in. One of the first questions he got was, Brandon, what the heck is happening with the Fibonacci sequence? And we talked about this briefly last year, but Elliot, do you want to talk about the Fibonacci sequence at all and how it appears here?
It- yes. The Fibonacci sequence is a mathematical sequence of numbers that you can get to by counting up from 0, and every number that's the next one you move to is the sum of the previous 2. So it goes 1, 1, 2, because 2 is the sum of 1 and 1, then 3, then 5, it's the sum of 2 and 3, 8, 13, and it gets pretty big after that. It seems kind of random at first when you're just kind of reading numbers on a page, but you can use the Fibonacci sequence to do some really fascinating things. It shows up in nature a lot. It's a more natural version of math. When you and I think of math, we think of all right angles and perfect thirds and things like that. Nature doesn't really do that. Nature does do the Fibonacci sequence. And so the Fibonacci sequence is often referred to as like the math of beauty. There's things you can do with the Fibonacci sequence that just look beautiful and you can't explain why. It just looks perfect when you look at it. And so I think that's what Brandon is kind of tapping into here is this art, this beauty and the math behind it. Or maybe it's Hoyd that likes the math behind it specifically. That's kind of my theory on it. But yeah, Fibonacci sequence, very fascinating, very above my head. That's about as much as I know.
I think it's interesting that it is used with virtuosity, and how that is going to incorporate into Yumi's religion, specifically. We'll see how that pans out. I'm curious on that. I wanted I wanted to highlight something that was interesting to me and was brought up in the Q&A. And somebody asked, there seems to be something off about the energy of Yumi and Painter by the end of the chapters. Both of them have a cognitive realm experience, and both of them seem to be extremely drained, like physically drained, where Yumi has stacked her rocks and then she can't even sit up straight, and then Painter encounters the actual, like the full-on nightmare, and then can't even like get back to his apartment. He's so exhausted. And the person in the Q&A highlighted pewter drag as a comparison as more than like Stormlight fatigue, because it Kaladin is drained a lot when he uses Stormlight, but it's never like super debilitating. Like he can still function. But this seems to be more like, and then Vin found a sleeping bag and passed out. Is
For like a
is
week. Yeah.
right. And so that's what. And Brandon Sanderson basically said, yes, there's something interesting happening with energy levels on these two planets. Interesting spot. You guys have any thoughts on that?
I feel like I might have more if I'd read more Mistborn. I've only read one Mistborn book, but one of the key differences in the magic systems there between Stormlight and Roshar is that a a night radiant expends Stormlight or Investiture to do their magic. A Allomancer is spending their metal. The Ferrochemist is spending their own energy. And so the differences between those are all interesting and important. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, magic system on this planet, what are we spending? What's the currency of the magic?
Right.
And I don't know if we know enough about that yet, but it does seem to be draining physically on both of them. I did know.
I'm thinking through this logically as well. So, thinking of Stormlight, we'll use Kaladin as the example. He uses Stormlight and lashes, flies, all these things, and it's like things his body couldn't, like the storm. His body is not like lifting things that could not be lifted by a human, right? Like he can lash things. He can use that to like move objects and whatnot. Um, but his body is not necessarily exerting more physical strength than it should, right?
Right. The
He
Stormlight
is
is
going to be
doing the lifting.
exhausted. Yes, he is going to be exhausted because he is still physically like fighting, but he's still like using his body to fight, right? Whereas Alamancy using pewter, they're like using the metal to like basically force their body into doing things it shouldn't. You're
Right.
not supposed to be able to run for 48 hours straight at unheard of physical speeds, right? And so afterwards it's like you fall, you pass out because your body literally like is not supposed to be doing that. Like you can't run for 48 hours like that, you know? And so does that mean that this is somewhere between the two? But we didn't see like physical exertion. If I'm using that example, we didn't really see like is it emotional exhaustion,
I wonder if it's
spiritual
artistic
exhaustion?
exhaustion.
Maybe so. Yeah, it could be like that's actually a really
And
good example if that is what we're seeing here with virtuosity. Because Yumi comes out and she's like totally like drained. Painter is totally drained, but we do know specifically that Painter did not use Investiture, right? That's the one thing that seems odd to me here, is if he's not using Investiture, why is he so exhausted?
And another little part of this is Painter never has inspiration. He always uses bamboo. So I wonder if he's always, and that's why I wonder if he's always in this constant low energy state because he doesn't have the artistic inspiration. Interesting that art, like spending art and I don't know. That's half a thought.
the word I might add in there too is focus. They both went through a period where they had to focus intensely on a specific thing. I wonder if that was part of the expending of the artistry within them, or in Painter's case, yeah, but a somewhat failure to let out that artistry. He's got a block.
Hmm.
Which I understand, I can fully see that. It's just in this specific case, why is he so like physically exhausted afterwards then? I mean, understand if it's like there's a block or things like that, but like if we're talking about exhaustion from using investiture, whether that's focus or like whatever, any capacity, like something has to be like kind of used up in order to feel that exhaustion, right? Is it just attempting to use something? Like was he like we don't know it, but like was he trying to use investiture and couldn't and like exhausted himself in some way, maybe unintentionally,
Hmm.
or what? Uh, that's the piece that feels odd to me. Which it is like in my head, like while reading through this as the story, like in chapter 7, right? I don't know if we want to get there, but it makes kind of sense because he kind of like he just passes out and wakes up elsewhere, and so I'm thinking it's like maybe something external in that case. Something kind
Yep.
of makes him fall over.
Sure. Another question that Brandon received is Painter splitting spirits when he paints them, like Yumi is when she's crafting them? And he Brandon gave a raffo on that one. Another thing that was discussed on the live stream that I actually want to get to your guys' info on is Hoyd's voice distracting? Is second person distracting for you? Because we've never had this before in a Cosmere work. Is Hoyd's voice narrating taking away from the story or adding for you? Or neither?
Okay, I will actually say for the first time listening to an audiobook, I felt like there were elements in here, like quips or little lines that didn't quite feel like they landed right or were quite in place. I didn't know if it was maybe. I mean, I was listening to Brandon Sanderson narrate. It genuinely could have been that he like the delivery wasn't like super seamless. It
Mm-hmm.
could have been. It almost felt like it was not 100% edited down smooth. It could have been how he was reading it. It could have been maybe the wording will be tweaked a little bit for the actual released book. Or maybe it is Hoyd's narration. I'm not sure, but something felt a little bit off to me, and so it might be attributed to this.
I enjoy it just because it's fairly similar to the way my brain works, which if you've listened to more than 2 of our podcast episodes, you've probably picked up on this. I love to just say, "Pause on that while I tangent over here for something vaguely related, and then come back and pick up where I left off." That's how my brain works. It's exactly how Hoyd is narrating the story as well. It works for me.
So something that they talked about on the live stream is Brandon Sanderson said, "I have never seen my beta readers so split on a topic." All of his beta readers usually can come to a consensus, but he's like they are split 50-50 on if Hoyd is distracting or if Hoyd is contributing to this literature piece. And I thought that was so funny because I think it just comes down to if you like Hoyd, you will like the interjections. And if you don't like Hoyd, you want him to get out of the way.
That's a good point. I bet it would be like that. I'm really curious to see how it comes into play throughout the whole story.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm kind of throwing a lot of stuff at the "ooh, I don't actually know what happens yet"
Right.
window, which I feel like is a little bit unfair for me, like talking on this podcast right now. But that is one that I'm genuinely like. I mean, I don't feel like it's causing any major problems right now, but it's made things feel slightly weird. I do love Hoyd, so we'll see where that. I just kind of need more time, I guess, to see where that goes.
Yeah.
It definitely lends a very lighthearted and almost joking element to the story, which might bother me if we try to go very serious places with this story.
Right.
If the story tries to go a serious place and Hoyd is still cracking jokes along the way, that might start to bother me. But I'm with you, Paul. Well, let's see where this goes.
I actually really like that you said that because if this was a Stormlight book, I would have issues with it. But I'm not approaching this as if it was a Stormlight book, so I have no issues. But if it does turn into, and then, Painter had this epic moment and blah 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 blah, and then design showed up and blah blah blah, like if there's random, which I don't assume that will happen, but if it does go super epic and there's still Hoyd jokes, yes, I would agree that that would be an issue. Currently, it is not for me, but we'll see how it goes. Couple more questions. He got the heon lines colors are 2 of 3 colors used in digital printers. The third is yellow. Is this a coincidence? And if it's not, what happened to yellow? And Brandon Sanderson gave that one a Raffo. He didn't answer that one. So that there might be some substance there.
That's actually really funny, by the way.
Yeah.
Excellent connection.
Another question. Nightmares seem to be more susceptible than Spren to perception change because they do not have a direct shard overseeing them. Is that correct? And Sanderson said, yes, that's correct. And then follow-up question, can you paint other invested entities such as Spren, Cognitive Shadows, and Fused and bind them as a painting? And Brandon Sanderson said, theoretically possible, yes, but the less tethered they are to their shard, the better.
And I would assume, kind of pulling that thread further, I mean, Roshar, we've got 3 shards
Right.
going on there. And so your odds of grabbing any random invested entity and trying to pull it away from a shard and bind it to something you're trying to do may be really difficult. Whereas here on this planet, much less so. Okay, I follow that train of thought.
What I got most out of it was somebody should take a paint and canvas to Threnody, because Threnody seems to be
Ah.
prime territory for binding crazy spirits.
Mhm.
And it seems like you could really tame Threnody quite well with a paintbrush. So That's an interesting one. Another one. Can you Nahel bond a nightmare? And Brandon Sanderson said, this is theoretically possible, yes.
Cool.
All right.
Good for the people who want to do that, I guess.
I'll pass.
Is it a coincidence that the two colors of the heon lines, teal and magenta, are the two same colors as else callers and lightweavers, the two radiants who can lightweave? And Brandon Sanderson said, yes, that's a coincidence. That was not intentional.
At least we have that clarification.
We already did the Nightblood one.
He did not say that it was a coincidence that it's the same colors found in your inkjet printer.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one was, will we ever find out who Hoyt is talking to in the text? And Sanderson said, don't waste your time trying to figure it out. I considered including an epilogue of Hoyt talking to whoever he's talking to. I decided not to, and it is not worth your time trying to figure it out. So that was the last one I wrote down.
I appreciate Brandon Sanderson's directness there with that answer. Like, it's not worth your time. I thought about including it, but it's not worth your time. But if that's the case, just say who it was, maybe. Like, in my head, I'm like, just say who it was, because, like, it's not worth our time. But now I want to know. You know, now I just want to know, even though it makes I'm sure it has no significance. I just want to know who he's talking to.
And that's my hope as well.
Just say it.
I hope he'll, just disclose that on, a Q&A at some point in the future of, who is Hoyt talking to? I do hope he'll answer that at some point, but he's just being very explicit that it's not in the text. Okay. Do you guys want to talk about the implications of Chapter 7 and how it leaves us? What are your thoughts on a body swap story? Are you super excited to go into part 2 here, or what are our thoughts moving forward?
As a story element, I'm excited to see what happens, because we've seen the stark differences between the worlds and the characters. So just from a story enjoyment point, I think it'll be really amusing, really fun. I'm not like, oh my gosh, that's insane. Like, I don't know what to think, like, it's part 1, like, it sets up like a nice, fun story beginning, and I'm excited for that.
I'm excited for the shape of the story after reading Brandon's notes at the end of the page. If you had just told me Brandon's writing a body swap story, I'd be like, okay. But the way he describes it is actually intriguing, because he he says specifically in his notes he wants to focus on the life swap, not the body swap side of it. It's
Right.
not that Painter is going to be in Yumi's body. It's that Painter will still feel like he's Painter. He'll just be living Yumi's life.
Right.
Everyone else will see Yumi, but he's still Painter. And so that gets around, and just the setting of it all too, with the separate planets and all, gets around the really cringy elements of body swap that come about sometimes in like fantasy TV series and things like that, where it just feeds into these like, awkward scenarios where people are talking to someone and they're really talking to their other friend and they say nasty things about them, and it's just like, okay, yeah, teenage drama. This is not where it seems like this is heading. This seems like it's heading for a much more existential, how do I learn to understand someone else's life and walk a mile in their shoes? And what can I learn by doing so? I think this could be a really cool story, and I'm excited for it.
Yeah. I couldn't have said it better myself. I'm really interested to see if he delves into, which I assume I would predict that he will, given the setup that we've just received, the difference between the religions, or the religion and lack of.
Yes.
Because I think when we get to Yumi waking up as Painter, she is going to immediately have an existential crisis of what the heck is my purpose, if not a religion, right? Like,
Yep.
And there seems to be like a consistent dialogue between Yumi and Painter moving forward. Not sure how that's going to work, but I'm very curious um from Yumi's side specifically on how she copes with day-to-day life of you paint this nightmare and that is your life. So I'm also very excited here. And last but not
Trevor, you
least,
had said,
go ahead.
are, are you going this direction? I was to make sure you got to your theory because you had
Yes.
told us earlier that you had a crazy theory that you were excited about. I wanted to make sure we got there.
Last but not least, the end of chapter 6 and the end of chapter 7, Yumi and Painter seem to wake up in this, or Painter wakes up on Yumi's planet. I'm not sure where Yumi goes, but Yumi gets a dialogue with something. She assumes it's a spirit from down below, quote unquote. And she has a dialogue, and then the spirit asks her for a boon and says, "Free us." Right? Us, the plural.
Yeah.
I think so.
And here's my crazy theory. I think the planet itself is talking to her. The spren, for lack of a better term, of the planet is talking to her. And us refers to Yumi's planet and Painter's planet. And freeing us would reconjoin those spirits back into one. Because the whole part of part one for Yumi is splitting these spirits into light bulb and dark bulb. And the dark bulb just sits there and the villagers use the light bulb. Or they have like little hovercraft like plateaus as well. I don't know. There's some weird stuff happening. But I assume that the planet has been split at like, and I'm not sure like the physics implications of all of that, but I assume that his end goal here is reunifying the planets that Virtuosity split when splintering herself. There's lots of different implications there that I have no answers for you for, but that is my big prediction, is that the planet itself is talking to Yumi and wants to be reunited with Planet 2.
I like the theory a lot. I think it fits in with this whole opposites theme that we've very much started on. Everything seems to have an opposite, and reunifying the opposites might be the end goal of our story here that could play into the free us. So I could see it. I'm following.
It's either unifying or it's going to be like a Goldilocks story where they find the planet that's not too hot, not too cold. They find one that's
Just
just
right.
right. No, I'm kidding. I think that's a pretty cool
That's
theory.
where the yellow went.
That's yellow, exactly. Well, but then that would mean that, well, then Yumi's planet is just like nothing, isn't it? Or maybe Yumi's planet has the yellow. Maybe she's yellow. Who knows? Maybe she's gonna go to Peter's planet and find the yellow. Stay tuned for wherever the heck we find the color yellow.
We have to fix our
in
digital
this
printers.
story. Exactly. Yeah. Cannot go around. I don't know. I'm sitting here and just trying to disprove your theory. I feel like I don't know enough to say one way or the other. It's just a cool prediction.
I I heard please free us and thought of something slightly different though. I had flashbacks to Adolin and Maya and our Jedi Spren,
Okay.
who are getting used as sharp blades, and how it takes us 3.5 books to discover that that's not what those Spren and beings would like to be used as. That's a captivity. That's a unpleasant thing for them. And so to have a spirit kind of reach out in the please free us, I thought of those spirits that Yumi just like bound in a sense into
Mm-hmm.
these devices that she's handing out to all of the people. I was seeing parallels in the whole they're just using these devices to power their everyday lives, to do farming better, to be able to see at night when it's dark. But what if this is another example of they're not understanding what they're doing, and what they think is just creating a nightlight is actually imprisoning a spren-like being that would rather not be imprisoned.
Be really curious to see Navani be a fly on the wall for Yumi's
Oh yeah.
for Yumi's little ritual there, and what Navani could figure out. That'd be crazy.
So, just to clarify also, so at the end of the story, we see that Painter's eyes open, and he looks behind him, or at least we as the reader see behind him, and see that that is Yumi
Mhm.
behind him. So Yumi hasn't gone anywhere yet. We just have confirmation that she will.
Correct.
That's my okay.
So Painter wakes up what seems to be on Yumi's planet. Like that there's a bright light and his eyes can't handle it. He sees Yumi. Yumi screams her head off. Scene ends. And then in the postscript, it's we're going for a body swap story, and Yumi will switch places with Painter as well. Is the last phrase there? So
Gotcha. Okay. Do you think we'll learn how they're switching? Like how they're? I assume we'll learn like how they travel, right? Or maybe that's the end of the book because they find their way They find their way back home.
yeah, I'm also curious on the mechanics of what just happened. Somebody picked up their cognitive realm spheres and went, Zoop.
Yeah. Exactly.
Anything else, gentlemen?
I actually have a just a little bit of a note to leave us on related to that, of how are they getting where they're going. You mentioned a little earlier the death rattle sounding things that were referencing the arrival of the nightmares,
Yeah.
where it said the raining, the blood of a dying god. One of those specifically says the nightmares came from the sky. And I thought of that in the very last words of the book, where it says where Painter basically gets sucked off of his planet onto the other. It says he stumbled to the balcony, looking out at the star. Then he heard something odd, a rushing sound, like water. He looked up. Something came from the sky and hit him hard. All went black. It's almost like that maybe interaction with a shard that created all of this is sort of what's happening again here to Painter, as he something from the sky comes down and snatches him and takes him off to this other planet. It's I don't know. I'm going to look for more information to see if I can tie those together more, but I almost wonder if it's like the remnants of a shard, or what, a rather large splinter of a shard who is acting here trying to get help, or maybe it's not a positive thing. I don't know. I saw some similarities there.
Real quick before we go. I know I'm going to be labeled as mercy obsessed, but I have a crazy theory that I was thinking about as I was dozing off last night of virtuosity is dead and gone. What if there's a shard that has arrived to try to fix the scene, and that's who's talking to or that's who's snatching Painter and setting this all up. And the first one that I thought of was Mercy, but anyway, we don't have to pull that thread too hard.
You are mercy obsessed. I'll say it. Although, but I will also add that I am mildly mercy obsessed too. I just haven't been saying it. I think it sounds super cool.
All right, let us reconvene next week with the full published book. I hope that the episode will come out on Tuesday. It may come out a little bit later because we may need more time to record it. But we're going to try to get into a good rhythm with Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. Thanks for joining me, Paul and Elliot.
See ya.
See ya.